Oklahoma Newsroom, you're watching the Press Row. I'm Jenny Carlson here with Barry Trammell. And Barry, it's OU Texas week, of course. Fans fired up, I'm sure, on both sides of the Red River. OU fans would say there's always great value in beating Texas, but does it go beyond just bragging rights for fans?
Well, I think it does in terms of Oklahoma historically. When the Sooners have dominated Texas over extended periods of years, that has meant great things for the Sooners beyond just bragging rights with Texas. If you look at the four major OU domination periods, they've all come or resulted in a period when OU was also relevant nationally, including national championships. The 50s under Bud Wilkinson, the early 70s under Barry Switzer, the 80s under Barry Switzer, and then the 2000s under Bob Stoops. What's interesting now is that Oklahoma is dominating Texas, but the national bounty is not coming forth.
Right.
So, you know, the Sooners,
doesn't that just mean that they've both fallen at least a hair?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does.
Or maybe more than a hair.
Well, I mean, I think what it shows is that Oklahoma doesn't have the national, particularly Texas. Oklahoma doesn't have the national powerhouse teams that it wants to have, and yet it can still beat Texas on a regular basis.
You know, I think it's also interesting. We've talked a lot, and you've written, I've written about the fact that Texas being good is good for the Big 12, which is ultimately good for Oklahoma. But clearly, this is such a down stretch for Texas. You know, yes, it's important for Oklahoma to beat Texas. It's important for, you know, sort of projecting where they may go, recruiting, those sorts of things. But you're beating a very down program. At some point, Texas has got to rebound so the value of beating them is what it once was, because it's nowhere close to where it used to be.
Well, rising Longhorns lift all boats. I
Sure.
mean, that's just the way it is. If the Longhorns are down, the Sooners don't have to be at their best to dominate the series, and that's what's going on. Oklahoma thrives when Texas is good.
Yeah.
You know, Mack Brown had excellent teams in the early 2000s, and Bob Stoops dominated. Darrell Royal was coming off an historic run when Barry Switzer and starting with Chuck Fairbanks started dominating in 1971. Yeah. So the Sooners need Texas to be great. I would argue that you want everybody on your schedule, everybody in your league to be better, because look at the SEC. It's, you know, it just raises everybody.
Right. It's the iron sharpens iron philosophy,
exactly.
Which right now, I don't know how much iron is coming out of Austin. Hey, you're watching the Press Row. I'm Jenny here with Barry, and being OU Texas week, let's talk a little bit more about that. This is the third year in a row, Barry, that both teams have started a OU Texas newbie at quarterback. 3 straight years where the guy that's taken the snaps has never started this game before. That doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't. In fact, it's not very often where it happens in any one year, much less 3 straight years. But quarterback stability has been a hallmark of this series. You look at Landry Jones and Colt McCoy and Vince Young and
Landry Jones alone started 3
and finished 4.
Finished 4, right.
Before him, Colt McCoy started 4 years. So it was a case of lots and lots of quarterback stability.
Yeah.
We haven't seen that. Landry Jones and David Ash started against each other in 2012. In 2012.
Yeah.
In 2013, all of a sudden it's Case McCoy and Blake Bell.
Yeah.
2014, Trevor Knight and Tyrone Swoops.
Yeah.
Now it's 2015. It's Jared Hurd down at Texas, and of course Baker Mayfield at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So it shows that there's been sort of a quarterback shuffle at both places, more so at Texas, but still both schools have been looking for sort of a franchise quarterback.
Well, and I think it speaks to, you know, you talk about the quarterback stability in those other, you know, stretches of time in this series, and I think it also pairs up with, you know, some dominance. We were talking earlier about dominance in these teams over the years, just how they've been nationally, winning conference championships, contending for national championships. You haven't seen either of these programs in that situation here for a while, and you know, I think everybody's identified Texas's quarterback deficiencies as really the root of their struggles over the last, say, 5 years or so. But Oklahoma, I mean, there are other things going on here, but the fact that they haven't been able to find a guy that is absolutely 100% their guy, that also speaks to the downturn that they've taken. It's not as extreme as Texas, but it's still there. I mean, it's both a cause and an effect of what's going on at these two schools.
Well, yeah, and look at it. You know, the Sooners have won 2 straight years. I mean, they've played poorly 2 straight years.
Right.
They happened to win one of the games last year.
Right.
But with this change in quarterback, OU's been inconsistent on offense, and they have not been the kind of team they want to be. Now, the early signs are fabulous on Baker Mayfield. He's been playing great. He looks like the real deal. It's possible he is going to solidify this quarterback position through the 2016 season.
Right.
But right now, you know, the recent history is that both of these schools have been searching for quarterbacks.
Well, and I would say the same thing about Gerard Hurd. Looks like he may be the guy that Texas needs at that quarterback position too. He may be the starter here for a few years as well. We'll see if we can't get some quarterback stability back in this rivalry. Hey, you're watching the Press Row. I'm Jenny here with Barry. Despite a lot of eyes on that OU-Texas game, OSU has a big game of its own, Barry. They're headed to West Virginia to face the Mountaineers, a game that I think really could give us a much better insight to what Oklahoma State is looking like as a team. You know, they've obviously played a couple good opponents so far, but just where are they? Offensively, though, they passed the ball 55 times against K-State, and you might say, can they win if they don't have that running game, which clearly that looks to be a problem. But they did win. They won throwing it a lot at Texas. Is that the recipe? Do they just need to throw the ball?
Well, I mean, I think at some point you probably have to run the ball, but I tell you, it's a case of they've had to throw to win these games. I mean, they had to throw to move the ball in Texas. They had to throw to move the ball in Kansas State. The Oklahoma State running game just has not come together. And it's getting fairly deep into the season. I mean, we're 5 games in. And West Virginia is a team that stacks the line. They play a bunch, 7, 8 guys in the box, play man-to-man coverage, and dare you to beat them through the air.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way Oklahoma State's going to have to do it. I think they're going to have to answer that challenge and hope that Mason Rudolph is on, which he has been most of his career, which is 7, 8 games. But hope that he's on and those receivers can win one-on-one duels. Oklahoma, which had a receiving core that had not been impressive, was very good against West Virginia and won a majority of the duels.
Yeah.
I personally think OSU's receiving core is better than OU's. I think those Cowboys, Brandon Shepard and James Washington and Marcel Aitman and the whole crew, I think they can win a lot of one-on-one duels.
Yeah.
That gives Oklahoma State the best chance to win.
And I understand that, especially against K-State, you know, Oklahoma State's playing at a disadvantage in that they're without Chris Carson and Rennie Childs. And frankly, you know, Jeff Carr and Raymond Taylor, who played instead of those two guys, I thought they ran pretty hard. They're smaller backs, so you're not going to sort of get the pop that you would out of a Chris Carson. But even if you had those guys to play against Kansas State, I'm still not sure the running lanes are there. Barry, coaches are always talking about using your personnel, playing to your strengths. Is it time that they just admitted they've got an offensive line that has a strength of pass blocking? They can't run block very well, but they can pass block pretty darn well. They've got a quarterback that's accurate. He doesn't tend to throw it to the other team. And you've got these wide receivers that they're talented and deep. I mean, you mentioned 3, but I was thinking of another 4, 5, 6 guys that can make plays for this team. That's the strength. Just play to it. And I'm not sure Mike Gundy's, his head may say yes. I'm not sure his heart says yes just yet.
Now, up until Saturday against K-State was a little different, but up until Saturday, OSU was continually trying to run to set up the pass. And I think that's got to be flipped. I think what you're saying is the Cowboys have to throw, and perhaps that will set up the run. Maybe that'll back some people off. But just running the ball has not worked. I think the Cowboys are going to have to be a pass-first offense, at least for now.
You know, I talked to Mike Yurcich a little bit on Monday about throwing a lot. You know, obviously he calls all those plays, and 55 passes, he had a say-so in a lot of that. He said the goal is, in addition to scoring points, the goal is to wear the defense out. Get to play 4, 5, 6, 7 in a drive. I said, if you pass on 1, 2, and 3, are you okay with that? Basically, he said absolutely. So I wouldn't be surprised if they don't get any more production out of that run game to what you're saying. Use the pass to set up the run, and maybe that's how you start to spring those guys out of the backfield a little bit. You're watching the Press Row. I'm Jenny here with Barry, and we talk about the OSU offense. Obviously, a lot of hand-wringing over that as the season has gone on, especially with the running game. But The defense, Barry, for as good as it was through the first 4 games, that game against K-State, I'm still scratching my head a little bit. They're playing their 5th-string quarterback, the Wildcats are, throughout most of that game. And especially in the first half, the defense just looked like they were completely caught off guard by what seemed to me to be very similar to what we've seen out of a lot of K-State teams, a guy that can run but can throw it a little bit. Is there reason to be concerned about this Cowboy defense?
Well, the answer to me is yes. It's a little bit confusing because the Cowboys aren't likely to see anybody like Kansas State again. I mean, you're not going to run into too many more wide receivers playing quarterback. You're definitely not going to run into any more Bill Snyders over there on the sideline weaving his magic. But for the Cowboys, we saw it in the second half. The Cowboys basically just stuffed Kansas State.
Yeah.
And K-State got a late drive off a long pass that was a little bit of a fortune play. So OSU's defense dominated in the second half.
Absolutely.
It should have dominated the whole game. When you're playing a 5th-string quarterback against a guy who's been a receiver up until that week and was just an emergency fill-in, you got to dominate. This is not Class 3A football where you can just put a good athlete at quarterback and hiking the ball and good things can happen. Good defenses contain those kinds of people, and OSU didn't do it. 28 first-half points, long drives. To me, it's a concern.
Yeah.
Now, they're going to have to stop Texas Tech and TCU and Baylor and Oklahoma and teams that throw it all over the place with the air raid.
Yeah.
So, they weren't hurt by that on Saturday, but it just did raise questions in my mind.
Yeah, and it looked to me, I was there, and like I said, I'm still a little confused as to why, as you mentioned in the first half, you weren't seeing especially some pressure. It felt like Cody Cook, who was the 5th-string wide receiver, or 5th-string quarterback, wide receiver turned quarterback, had just a lot of time to stand back, make decisions in the passing game. He wasn't being pressured. You've got guys like Emmanuel Ogbah, Jimmy Bean, Vincent Taylor. Some of those linebackers, we're seeing the depth of the linebacker position as a guy like Chad Whitener fills in for Ryan Simmons and plays, pretty darn well on Saturday. So they've got that talent up front, and it just felt like they were letting him, do whatever he wanted to do. They brought the pressure in the second half. You saw things change. It didn't seem like they made a ton of gigantic adjustments. Played the quarterback run game a little more, I guess, honestly, if you will. Jimmy Bean, predominantly, I didn't feel like he was maybe getting as far afield in the backfield and able to contain a little bit better. But it wasn't like they scrapped and changed defensive philosophies. It was minor things. I think they just played better in the second half as much as anything. But again, they had contained Gerard Hurd, a guy that runs around a bunch and is a big threat, can throw it some. At Texas, played so well down there, and it almost felt like there was no carryover. It was really bizarre. And again, I'm still not sure I fully understand why. But kudos to them for turning it around. But you can't, if their offense would have been sputtering in the first half, they would have found themselves in a 3 or 4 touchdown hole, and I'm not sure even a really great offense can come back from something like that.
Yeah, the Oklahoma State defense gave the Cowboys a serious hole just by no stops. Now, against Bill Snyder, it's happened to better defenses than
Absolutely.
Oklahoma State, so that can happen. We all admit Snyder is a genius, but we'll see more against West Virginia. The Mountaineers are not the Texas Tech, Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma, OSU air raid. Their passing game is just sort of so-so. Skyler Howard is not an efficient quarterback. He misses a lot of throws. I think the Cowboys can pressure him.
But they need to. That needs to come.
And they have a good running game, though, so you got to be careful for that. West Virginia is actually a whole lot more like Kansas State than they are these air raid teams to come. So it'll be a good test.
Right, and I think, going to West Virginia is something we haven't really talked about. The Cowboys go there 2 years ago, and it was a total clunker. J.W. Walsh, the starting quarterback that day, just had mighty struggles. They end up losing. It was close late, but they couldn't convert down the stretch. They go home with a loss. Really kind of gave us a shade of what was to come, some struggles to come. So it's a tough place to play in Morgantown. And again, you don't want to spot your offense a big 2 or 3 touchdown hole. You want to make sure that when you come out, you're coming out with that fire. I have to think that K-State game was maybe a little bit of a red flag, a wake-up call for this defense, because I don't think they want to be in the same type of hole. on the road in Morgantown as they were against K-State at home on Saturday. Hey, be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.